The villagers gathered close, their faces bathed in the warm glow of the flickering fire. Their whispers were soft and uneasy, like the wind brushing against dry leaves. All eyes turned toward the elder as he sat at the center, his presence commanding their attention. His hand rose and the murmurs faded into silence. "Long ago," he began, his voice steady and deep, "women who entered the forest after sunset never returned." The words hung heavy in the air. Gasps broke the stillness as his gaze swept over the group. It wasn't beasts or bandits. It was something else, something no one dares to name. A young boy broke the quiet, his voice trembling yet curious. "Why does the forest take only women?" All heads turned toward him, but the elder did not meet his gaze. He looked instead toward the distant shadows of the forest, his tone low. "Some questions are better left unanswered." The villagers sat frozen, their fear growing thicker with every word. Then a voice, steady and strong, cut through the tension. "If no one else will find the truth, I will." The boldness of the declaration turned all eyes toward its source. Her stance was firm, her expression resolute. Disbelief rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads, others muttered warnings. A woman stepped forward, her face pale with fear. She reached out, her voice pleading. "This is not your fight." "It became my fight," came the answer, sharp and unwavering. "The day my sister disappeared." The words silenced even the most doubtful. The fire's crackle filled the pause as the weight of the promise settled on everyone present. The elder raised his hand once more, this time pointing toward the dark line of trees that loomed in the distance. His tone carried both warning and sorrow. "The forest is alive, child. It sees. It listens." The fire flickered as a gust of wind swept through, carrying with it the sharp scent of the trees. The woman who had spoken earlier fell to her knees, her tears glinting in the firelight. "Please don't leave us like she did." The girl moved toward her and embraced her, her tone softer but no less determined. "I'll return with the truth. I promise." She turned away before doubt could take hold, her shadow stretching long and slender as she walked toward the forest. The villagers watched in silence, their breaths held as though the very act of exhaling might seal her fate. The flames dimmed further, struggling against the rising cold wind that followed her. A murmur broke through the crowd, soft yet filled with dread. "The forest has claimed another." The fire sputtered, and the night deepened as the villagers' eyes stayed fixed on the line of trees. Somewhere within, the truth waited, dark and patient. The memory of her sister's smile was vivid. She had waved goodbye, her voice cheerful and sure. "I'll be back before nightfall." Those were the last words she had spoken. The night had stretched endlessly, the stars watching in silence. She had never come home. The thought weighed heavily, replaying like a drumbeat in Nyala's mind. She sat beside her sister's unfinished weaving. The patterns were strong and intricate, but incomplete. Her hands brushed over the threads as if touching them might bring her back. "I should have stopped her," she whispered. "Now, I have to bring her back." A voice interrupted her thoughts. Soft but urgent. "You're brave, Nyala, but the forest is not for us. It takes everyone who dares." The warning hung in the air. She didn't answer immediately. Her resolve was a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. She stood, her gaze steady. "I can't let fear stop me. I have to know." Outside, the villagers had gathered, their voices a chorus of doubt and unease. They whispered among themselves, their words carrying through the still air. An elder shook his head, his tone filled with regret. "She's walking into a curse." The murmurs swirled, a tide of fear and disbelief. Nyala made her way to the herbalist's hut, where the air was thick with the scent of dried leaves and roots. The woman's eyes were sharp as she looked up, her words slow and deliberate. "The forest knows who enters. It never forgets." She reached for a small bundle and unwrapped it, revealing 3 charms. Her hands moved purposefully as she placed them into Nyala's palms. Do not speak to those who call your name. Do not take what isn't yours. Keep moving, no matter what you see. The weight of the charms was small but significant. The herbalist pointed to each one in turn. This is for courage, this is for protection, and this is for truth. Her gaze lingered, her voice lowering. These will guide you, but they will not save you from yourself. Nyala left the hut, her steps firm, but the path ahead was not yet clear. She was stopped by another voice, more familiar and filled with worry. If you go, you might not come back. What will your mother do then? The question lingered, heavy, with concern. Nyala's response was quiet, but resolute. She will wait, and I will return. At the threshold of her home, her mother stood in silence. Her face held no tears, only a deep and endless sadness. Nyala stepped closer, her voice a whisper. I'll return, I promise. She didn't wait for an answer. Some promises are made in the silence between words. She tied the charms around her neck and approached the edge of the forest. Her heartbeat quickened, but her steps did not falter. She whispered to herself as she crossed the threshold. I am not afraid. I will find her. The trees seemed to lean closer as she disappeared into their shadows, the world behind her fading into silence. The forest swallowed the last rays of light as she stepped into its depths. The world behind her seemed to disappear, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against her ears. She whispered to herself, her voice barely breaking the stillness. Even the birds don't sing here. Her grip on the charm tightened, the small token a fragile anchor in the unknown. The air felt alive, thick with unspoken words. A voice called her name, soft and urgent, so familiar it froze her steps. She turned, her breath quick and shallow. It's not real, she muttered, forcing her feet forward. Keep moving. The charm in her hand grew warm as though it agreed. The shadows moved at the edges of her vision, flickering like restless flames. She spun around, searching, but found only stillness. Her heartbeat pounded louder than her footsteps. The whispers began, threading through the leaves. They carried her name, a haunting melody. You're not welcome here, a voice murmured, deep and cold. She clutched the charm tighter and walked faster. A figure emerged, its shape shifting like water. Faces she knew, faces she feared. It became clear, then blurred, and then clear again. Turn back, child. This place isn't for you. The words were slow and deliberate, each one sharp as a blade. She did not answer, though her hands trembled. The figure changed again, settling into the familiar shape of her mother. Its eyes filled with sorrow, and its voice quivered. Don't do this, my daughter. Please. The plea struck her like a blow, and she wavered. Her steps faltered. Her grip on the charm slipped. The words echoed in her ears, but she closed her eyes and took a shaking breath. The rule was clear. Keep moving. The voice shifted, growing louder, more desperate. A scream pierced the air. Her sister's voice, raw with fear. She was trapped, crying out for help just ahead. Nyala's feet froze. Her body pulled forward, but the charm burned hot against her skin. She clenched it tightly, her voice trembling. It's not real. Keep moving no matter what you see. She closed her eyes and ran, the cries tearing at her resolve. The laughter followed, a sound like dry leaves cracking underfoot. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she stumbled into a clearing. The air here felt different, lighter, but no less dangerous. A woman stood before her, calm and unyielding. You don't look like you belong here, child. The words carried neither threat nor welcome, only curiosity. Nyala studied the stranger, unsure if she was ally or illusion. The woman's voice was low but firm. The forest has its price. Are you ready to pay it? Nyala hesitated, but met her gaze, her determination clear. The woman gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. The forest seemed to watch as the two stood together, its whispers fading into an expectant silence. The path twisted and turned until it opened into a village hidden deep within the forest. It was silent, too silent. Women moved through the space with glowing eyes, their faces blank and their steps unnaturally smooth. They carried out tasks with no words, no emotion. Their stillness sent a chill through the air. Nyala stepped forward, her voice sharp with urgency. "Where is my sister? Why won't you speak to me?" The women did not look up. Their gazes were distant, fixed on nothing. Her attention turned to the tree at the center of the village. It glowed, with a light that pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. She could feel its power. It hummed in the ground beneath her feet. Zuba's voice was steady but low. "That tree holds the forest's power, but it is guarded by spirits." Before the weight of those words could sink in, laughter echoed through the village. It was mocking, a sound like dry leaves caught in the wind. The watcher emerged, its presence as unnerving as the first time. "Didn't I tell you? You don't belong here." Its voice dripped with satisfaction as it turned toward Zuba. "And you? Did you think you could betray the forest? Tell her everything and walk away?" The watcher's smile twisted into something cruel. "She isn't your ally. She's part of the curse." Nyala froze, her mind racing. Zuba's gaze dropped for a moment, her silence louder than words. The watcher continued, its tone triumphant. "Bound to the forest, just like the rest of them. She cannot leave." The women with glowing eyes turned toward Nyala, their movements slow but deliberate. Their gaze locked onto her, one by one. They began to close in, their steps eerily synchronized. The air grew heavy with tension. Zuba's voice broke through, hesitant but firm. "If you destroy the tree, the forest will destroy us all." Her words carried a plea and a warning. Nyala tightened her grip on the charms around her neck. "I've come too far to turn back now." Her voice was steady, her resolve unshaken. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the glowing tree. The women moved closer, their presence suffocating. Nyala stood her ground, her heart pounding. She whispered to herself, her tone firm. "This is my fight." Her fists clenched as she prepared to face whatever came next. The women's glowing eyes surrounded her, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Nyala gripped the charms tightly as the women with glowing eyes moved closer. Their steps were slow, their gazes unblinking, and their presence suffocating. She pressed the charms against her chest, her voice trembling but firm. "This has to work." The charms grew warm, and a sudden burst of light erupted, forcing the women back. Their movements faltered, and Nyala seized the chance to break free, darting into the trees. Behind her, Zuba stood frozen, her expression torn. Her voice cut through the chaos, filled with fear and doubt. "They'll never let you go." The words followed Nyala as she disappeared into the forest, her steps quick and uneven. The trees blurred around her as she ran, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Shadows moved at the corners of her vision, racing alongside her. The whispers returned, weaving through the air, urging her to stop. They grew louder, filling her ears. Her grip tightened on the charms, her voice steady. "Keep going. Don't look back." A cold laugh pierced the whispers, sharp and cruel. The watcher appeared ahead of her, its form shifting as it blocked her path. "Did you think you could run from me?" Its voice was filled with mockery. Nyala hesitated, her feet skidding to a halt. The watcher raised a hand, and the forest seemed to twist. The ground shifted, the trees bent unnaturally, and figures began to emerge. Faces she recognized, voices she trusted, all calling her name. Her heart pounded, but she pushed through, her focus unbroken. The forest opened into a clearing, and she stumbled forward, gasping for breath. The glowing tree stood before her, its light pulsating like a heartbeat. She stared at its twisted roots, noticing how they pulsed, as if alive. Her voice was soft, filled with dawning horror. "It feeds on them. That's why they never leave." Zuba's voice came from behind her, weary and filled with pain. "I was like them once, trapped by the Watcher. The tree took my life, my soul." Her words carried the weight of years spent in torment. She looked at Nyala, her gaze somber. I've been bound to this forest ever since. Before Nyala could respond, the Watcher appeared again, its laughter echoing through the clearing. It turned to Zuba, its tone sharp and cutting. You were my favorite, Zuba, and now you turn against me? The air grew heavy as the Watcher's presence loomed over them. Zuba stepped forward, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. Destroy it, Nyala. Your courage can break the curse. Go, and don't look back. She turned toward the spirits, her hands raised to hold them back. The spirits howled as they surged forward, but Zuba stood her ground, creating an opening for Nyala. Nyala hesitated, her heart racing. The tree pulsed before her, its glow both mesmerizing and menacing. Zuba's words echoed in her mind. Her grip on the charms tightened, and she took a deep breath. She ran toward the glowing tree, her steps sure, her determination stronger than the fear that tried to stop her. Nyala stood before the massive tree, its glowing roots pulsating like a heartbeat. The light surged and faded in rhythm, as if alive. She took a steady breath and whispered, "This is it, the heart of the forest." Her fingers brushed the charms around her neck, seeking strength for what lay ahead. The memory of Zuba's final words echoed in her mind, clear and unwavering. Strike at the roots, where the light is weakest. The instructions guided her steps as she approached the base of the tree. The roots twisted and writhed beneath her, glowing brighter as she moved closer. She gripped Emma Asa's charm tightly and plunged it into the nearest root. A sharp crack split the air, and the tree shook violently. The light within it flared, and a powerful storm erupted. Wind howled around her, carrying glowing embers that burned like tiny stars. The ground trembled beneath her feet, but she stood, firm. From the tree's depths emerged dark, shadowy spirits, their forms shifting and screeching. They circled her, their voices sharp and accusing. "You dare to defy us! You will perish!" Their words tore through the air like thunder. Nyala's heart raced, but she refused to retreat. She reached for a sharp stone and slashed at the roots with fierce determination. The spirits lunged at her, their icy touch grazing her skin. She ducked and dodged, her courage unyielding. "You won't stop me," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. The roots resisted, glowing brighter with each strike. The storm intensified, the wind threatening to knock her down. She clenched her teeth and struck again, each blow filled with purpose. The tree groaned, its light flickering like a dying flame. As the last root was severed, the tree let out a xiao, piercing wail. The sound was deafening, a cry of anguish and defeat. Nyala stepped back, her chest heaving. "This is for my sister and all the others you've taken," she shouted, her voice cutting through the storm. The tree began to crumble, its once brilliant light fading into darkness. The spirits wailed as they dissolved into the air, their power broken. The forest trembled, and the ground beneath her, feet cracked. The destruction spread quickly, the collapse consuming everything in its path. A voice, soft and mournful, echoed from the shadows. "You've freed them, but the forest will not survive." The words hung in the air as the forest continued to fall apart around her. Nyala turned to see the enchanted women beginning to stir. Their glowing eyes dimmed, and their movements became natural, though unsteady. One voice rose above the others, filled with disbelief and hope. "Nyala, is it really you?" She rushed to her sister, embracing her tightly. Relief washed over them, both. The women followed Nyala out of the forest, their steps hesitant but growing stronger. When they emerged, they saw a barren, ash-covered plain where the forest had once stood. The silence was heavy, but Nyala spoke softly. "The forest is gone, but so is the curse." The women nodded, their gazes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. They stood together, the weight of their freedom mingling with the cost of what had been lost. The land was empty, but hope lingered in the air, ready to grow again. The women stirred, their glowing eyes fading to reveal soft, natural gazes. Nyala knelt beside her sister, her heart pounding as she reached out to touch her. A voice, faint and trembling, broke the silence. Nyala, is it really you? Her sister's eyes widened in recognition, though confusion clouded her expression. Nyala pulled her close, holding her tightly, her voice shaking with relief. I thought I'd lost you forever. Tears streamed down her face as her sister clung to her, the weight of their reunion filling the air with unspoken emotions. The other women rose slowly, their movements hesitant as though waking from a long dream. They blinked, their memories tangled and unclear. They looked to Nyala, who stood, her strength steadying them. With a nod, she motioned for them to follow her. Their steps were cautious as they left the forest behind. The air grew lighter, but the ground beneath their feet was soft with ash. When they emerged, they found a barren, desolate plain where the forest had once stood. The land stretched wide and empty, silent but for their breaths. The village came into view, and its people gathered, their faces painted with awe and fear. Whispers rose among them as the women approached. She did it. The forest is gone. The words carried a mixture of amazement and unease. They watched Nyala, their gazes torn between reverence and doubt. A few stepped forward, their voices laced with sorrow. She saved the women, but at what cost? Others shook their heads, murmuring that the forest's protection had been their shield, its loss an uncertain future. Nyala's mother broke through the crowd, rushing toward her. She embraced her daughter and her lost child, her tears flowing freely. You've brought her back. You've done what no one else could. Her gratitude was raw and unshaken, her arms holding them tightly. The village elders gathered soon after, their expressions heavy with concern. They spoke of the land's emptiness, the challenge ahead. We must rebuild, one said, his tone resolute. But it will take time. The others nodded, their words blending, determination with uncertainty. By the river, Nyala sat alone, her reflection rippling in the water. She traced the lines of her charms, their warmth now faint. Her thoughts drifted to the cost of her victory, the weight of what had been lost. She whispered to herself, her voice low. I saved them, but we've lost so much. The whispers in the village grew louder, carrying tales of her bravery. Her name spread beyond the hills and fields, her story retold with reverence. She faced the forest's curse and won. We will never forget her courage. Her actions became a light in the darkness, a reminder of hope. Nyala turned her gaze back to the village. She saw her sister among the women, their hands working to rebuild what the forest had taken. A small smile touched her lips as she stood. The land may be bare now, she said softly, her voice steady, but we can grow something new. The barren ground held the promise of renewal, and Nyala knew their story was far from over. The fire crackled softly, sending dancing shadows over the gathered faces. The elder's voice rose above the quiet murmurs, steady and commanding. Come closer. Let me tell you a story of courage and sacrifice. The crowd leaned in, their eyes reflecting the fire's glow, their ears ready for the tale. The elder's gaze swept over them as the story began. There was once a girl who faced the forest's curse. She walked into the unknown, armed only with courage and hope. Though the path was dark, her steps did not falter. She went not for herself, but for those she loved. The fire popped, and the elder paused, letting the weight of the words settle. When she reached the heart of the forest, she found the truth. The tree that held the forest's power also held its curse. To free the lost, she had to destroy what kept the forest alive. The elder's voice grew softer. The truth came at a cost, but it freed the lost and broke the curse. The listeners stirred, some glancing at one another, the sorrow of the tale filling the air. The elder continued, the tone firm but reverent. She knew the danger, yet she stood firm. That is true courage, not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. She chose the safety of others over her own. A brief silence followed before the elder's voice grew sharper. But let this tale also be a warning. Curiosity can lead to wisdom, but it can also bring destruction. Know that some truths demand more than you are ready to give. The fire dimmed slightly, as though agreeing with the elder's words. The tone shifted, softer now, filled with a quiet strength. Even in ashes, we can plant seeds of a new beginning. The forest is gone, but the land is not barren forever. From the loss comes the chance to grow again. The elder leaned forward, their eyes burning with conviction. Her story is our guide. Let it teach us to face our fears with wisdom, to act not for ourselves, but for the good of all. The crowd nodded slowly, their faces thoughtful. The fire burned low, the embers glowing softly as the elder spoke the final words. Sometimes, the truth demands a heavy price, but it is better to face it than live in fear. The crowd sat quietly, the tale settling deep within their hearts. The fire flickered, casting its light on faces that now carried both the weight of the story and the hope it left behind.